Have you ever said something like, I'll meet you here tomorrow, and, known exactly what you meant, even though here and tomorrow, well, they change meaning every single time depending on when and where you actually say it?
Oh, absolutely. It's pretty amazing when you stop to think about it. These tiny words, like little signposts in our conversations telling us who's talking, where they are, maybe even their social status.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today, this really fascinating linguistic idea called deifixes.
Hmm.
We're looking at a pretty recent study, March 2024, from the Journal of English Education and Teaching. And they basically put the script of Beauty and the Beast under a linguistic microscope to analyze this very thing.
Right. So our mission today is really to give you a bit of a shortcut to understanding this quite subtle part of communication. We'll unpack how words shift their meaning based on context and maybe reveal some hidden structures in the dialogue of, a really well-loved movie.
Okay, so let's get started. What is deixis exactly? Can you break that down a bit?
Sure. So at its heart, DXEs is about words whose reference point changes depending on the context. The study defines it as words that indicate people, place, time, social distinction, and role in discourse.
Mm.
Think of them like pointers, yeah. Pointing to the who, what, where, when from the speaker's viewpoint in that exact moment.
Oh, okay.
They're called deictic expressions, and they're really fundamental to pragmatics. That's the study of how context shapes meaning.
So it's not just the dictionary definition. It's about how the word works in that specific situation. That's quite a shift in thinking.
Exactly.
And the study you mentioned, it uses Cruz's theory from 2000. It breaks DXEs down into 5 types.
That's right, 5 types. First, you've got person deixis. That's your pronouns I, you, he, she, they, all about who's involved in the conversation.
Okay, simple enough.
Then spatial deixis, words like here, there, this, that. They point to locations, but always relative to where the speaker is.
Got it. Like this castle means something different depending if you're inside or outside.
Precisely. Then temporal deixis, that's about time. Words like now, then, yesterday, tomorrow. Their meaning depends on when you say them.
Right. Now is always changing.
Always. Number 4 is social DXEs. This one's interesting. It includes things like titles, honorifics, terms of endearment or respect. They signal social status or the relationship between speakers, like saying Your Majesty versus, I don't know, Cogsworth.
Huh. Yeah, you could definitely see that in the movie. Gaston probably wasn't great with that one.
Agrees. Probably not. And finally, discourse DXEs. This is when words refer to parts of the conversation or text itself, like saying in this section or that argument we just had. It points within the discourse.
Okay, 5 types. And why Beauty and the Beast? What made that script, the 2016 one, so suitable for this kind of deep dive?
Well, it seems like a really good choice, actually. The dialogue, even though it's a fantasy, feels quite natural. It's adapted from how people might really talk. So it gave the researchers a lot of, rich detail to analyze.
And the language itself is pretty accessible, right? Good for students learning about this stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Simple words, easy to understand, but used in complex ways. Plus, it's just a hugely popular movie, so lots of people are familiar with it. Makes it relatable.
Okay, so a good test case.
Yeah.
How did they approach analyzing it? Did they look at the whole script structure?
They did. They analyzed 81 scenes in total, which was over 11,000 words, quite a bit of text.
Yeah.
And they used a standard movie structure framework. This one's from New Hayati, 2019. It breaks a story into sections like orientation, complication, rising action, turning point, resolution, and coda.
Standard narrative arc stuff.
Pretty much. But they found something interesting right off the bat.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
Well, they didn't find a coda section in the Beauty and the Beast script. That bit at the very end that often wraps things up or gives a moral.
Huh. So it just ends more directly after the resolution.
Seems like it. An interesting choice. Maybe it makes it feel a bit more modern or something.
Okay. And how did the scenes break down across those other sections? Where did most of the action happen, linguistically speaking?
Well, the rising action was the absolute giant. It accounted for 40 scenes, almost half the movie, 49%.
Nearly half. Wow. Why so much there?
It makes sense, really. That's where all the problems start bubbling up, characters meet, conflicts develop, things get challenging. It's the engine driving towards the climax. The study mentions it's where problems develop, challenging events, contradictions. Anderson called it the conflict leading to the climax. So lots happening.
Right. The core of the plot development. What came next?
The turning point, or the climax, was second. That was 18 scenes, about 22%. That's described as, the most thrilling part where everything comes to a head and the characters' fates are decided.
High stakes, high drama. Makes sense.
Then came the orientation, the beginning part. That was 12 scenes, 15%. Introducing everyone, the setting, the initial
Setting
situation.
the stage.
Exactly. And the last two were smaller. Complication, where things start getting tricky, was 8 scenes, 10%. And the resolution, wrapping things up, was the smallest section with just 3 scenes, only 4%.
Okay, so rising action dominates, followed by the turning point. That gives us a map of the story's structure. Now, the big question, what about the DXs within that structure? What types did they find most?
Right, this is where it gets really interesting. They found a total of 1,632 deictic expressions across the whole script.
Okay.
And one type just blew the others away, person DXs. Pronouns like I, you, we, they. It accounted for 1,317 instances. That's 80%.
8%, just from pronouns.
80%, which when you think about it makes a lot of sense. It's a story driven by characters talking to each other, about each other, constantly defining who's who in the conversation. And this matches other studies too, like ones on Aladdin and Maleficent. Person DXs is usually dominant.
That really hammers home how central the characters and their interactions are. Just, wow. What were the next biggest categories?
Well, after that huge chunk for person DXs, the next most frequent was social DXs. That came in at 111 instances, about 7%.
Okay, social DXs, titles, forms of address.
Exactly. And that fits Beauty and the Beast perfectly, doesn't it? You've got royalty, servants, villagers, different social statuses interacting all the time, especially in the castle. Those words signaling position or closeness are really important.
Makes sense. And number 3?
Number 3 was spatial DXs pointing to places. Here, there, this room, that wing of the castle. That was 104 instances, around 6%. Again, logical for characters moving around a specific setting, referring to locations relative to themselves.
Right, navigating the castle and the village.
And the last two were much less common. Discourse deixes, referring to the conversation itself, was 57 instances, about 4%. And the least common of all was temporal deixes, time words. Only 43 instances, just 3%.
Only 3% for time. That seems low.
It does seem a bit low. The study suggests this might be because they focus specifically on calendric time words like tomorrow or now, and they explicitly didn't count verb tenses as temporal DXEs.
Ah, okay. That methodological choice makes a difference.
It does, and apparently a similar finding came up in a study on Aladdin, so maybe it's common in these kinds of analyses.
Interesting. So we have the overall breakdown. Person DXEs is king, followed by social and spatial, with discourse and temporal lagging behind. But did this pattern hold true throughout the movie? Or did it change depending on the section orientation, rising action, etc.?
That's another really fascinating part of the analysis. They found that all 5 types of DXEs, person, spatial, temporal, social, and discourse, were present in the orientation, the complication, the rising action, and the turning point.
So right through the beginning, the build up the climax.
Yeah.
You need all these different kinds of pointers to tell the story properly.
Exactly. It shows how crucial they all are for establishing the scene, developing the conflict, and reaching the peak of the action. You need to know who, where, when, social roles, and track the discourse itself.
But I sense a but coming. What happened in the resolution? That tiny 4% section at the end.
Yes. Here's the twist. In the resolution section, they found only 2 types of DXEs remained.
Only 2. Which ones?
Person DXEs and social DXEs.
Wait, so spatial, temporal, and discourse DXEs just disappeared. They weren't used at all in the final scenes.
Completely absent, according to the study's findings for that section.
Wow, okay, that's really striking. What does that mean? Why would references to place, time, and the conversation itself just vanish at the very end?
It really makes you think, doesn't it? The study doesn't give a definitive why, but we can speculate a bit, perhaps. Perhaps once the main conflict is resolved, the story's focus narrows dramatically. Well, maybe the where and the when become less important. The journey is over, the climax is past. The need to constantly orient the audience in space and time or refer back to plot points diminishes.
Right, the big questions are answered.
Exactly. So what's left? It seems like the focus shifts almost entirely to the characters themselves, the who. Who are they now? What is their relationship? How have they changed? So, person DXEs, I, you, we, remain central.
DXEs too.
And social DXEs maybe because confirming the new social order or the intimacy achieved, like between Belle and the prince, becomes paramount. It's about their connection and status relative to each other.
So the language itself sort of settles down, focusing only on the core personal and social outcomes once the action is resolved. less need for the scaffolding of time and place.
That seems like a plausible interpretation. It suggests language really adapts to the narrative's needs, stripping away unnecessary contextual markers when the focus becomes purely relational.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It shows DXCs isn't just random. It serves a narrative function that changes across the story arc.
Absolutely. And it highlights what the study points out. Deixis has a critical role in building the communication process. Using the right kind of DXCs at the right time really helps get the message across clearly and quickly.
So, why should someone listening care about all this? How does knowing about person DXCs or spatial DXCs in a movie help them?
Well, I think it's more than just movie analysis. Understanding these patterns, especially the dominant types like person, social, and spatial DXCs, it makes you a more aware communicator. You start to see how these subtle word choices work in your daily conversations, not just on screen.
How so?
You become more attuned to how people position themselves, how they refer to others, how they establish context. It enhances your understanding of how language actually constructs meaning in real-time interactions.
So it's like getting a peek under the hood of communication.
Exactly. It's a key to being maybe a more informed and perceptive listener and speaker yourself. You notice the nuances.
Okay, so a final thought for our listeners to take away from this deep dive into DXCs and Beauty and the Beast.
Well, now that you're sort of tuned into this idea of Dakes, try noticing it. Listen for those pointing words in your next conversation or when you're reading or watching something else.
See how often here, there, now, then, this, that pop up?
Exactly. And think about how those little words are constantly shaping your understanding of who's talking, where they are, when it's happening, their relationship. And maybe consider, how would your understanding change if just a few of those pointers were different?
It's like a new lens for understanding language, isn't it?
It really is. And once you start seeing it, it's kind of hard to unsee the hidden contextual architecture these words build all around us. It fundamentally changes how you hear dialogue.